Good day, everybody, and thank you so very much for taking the time to be here. My name is John McFall, and I run a practice within AWS that specializes in supply chain, transportation, and logistics. One of the things I want to do first is just do a quick level setting around Amazon. When people start the conversation with me often about the Amazon supply chain, they say, John, one thing that is true is that you work at unprecedented scale. And it's an interesting observation, but let's go ahead and put some numbers on it so that we get a real sense of how that scale compares to your own supply chain. So inside Amazon, we have more than 250 million unique products. Those products are represented at 450 million at the SKU level. We have more than 200,000 robots deployed in over 200 fulfillment centers that we own across more than 14 marketplaces. But of course, we don't own all aspects of our supply chain. If you look at that global mile operation, we are using Maersk and others to move volume globally. If you look at the middle mile operations, yes, we have Amazon Transportation Service, but in the UK we're using Eddie Stobart's, and over in the US we're using JB Hunt's, and we're using all of the other middle mile movers to move volume around our own network. But then when it gets to the last mile, that's when it gets really complex. So now in the last mile, we've got the Royal Mails, we've got the Amazon Logistics, we've got our delivery service partners, we've got Amazon Flex, we've got USPS, FedEx, and all the rest of it. So when we look at this notion of unprecedented scale, it is within that context that I want you to imagine the amount of collaboration required in order for the business to operate. The next aspect that people talk about frequently is the notion of hyperspeed. Now, inside AWS, my colleagues will tell me, say, look, John, 45 million transactions per second across the Amazon website, that's all you need to know about speed. But I suppose there are two other lenses we could look at. The other lens is the physical movement of product. So if you can imagine that Q4 last year, it's always our busiest quarter. And we had Prime Day in Q4 last year as well. But what is more, we also had the pandemic. So in the context of the pandemic, in our busiest quarter, in our busiest one of our busiest days, what do you think is the fastest time? Not average, fastest time that Amazon was able to move a product from point of order to delivery. Now, whilst you're thinking about that, I also want you to imagine how much inventory knowledge do you require in order to achieve hyperspeed. So for Amazon, the fastest time was 29 minutes and 54 seconds. 29 minutes and 54 seconds. So going back to that piece that I posed about inventory, it's not good enough to have a reasonable idea of where your inventory is if you want to achieve that sort of speed. You need real-time or near real-time information as to the current holdings of your inventory across your network. You need the ability to autonomously, because we're dealing with many thousands of orders, you need the ability to autonomously select which fulfillment center is going to fulfill that order based on the knowledge of its inventory holdings and current operational output. Then the next aspect of hyperspeed is that it was once the realm of Amazon to be able to do, same day, 1 hour, sub-hour deliveries, next day delivery, etc. But I'm increasingly hearing from customers in all walks of life, whether it be aerospace or whether it be mining, where they're being asked the simple question, John, why is it I can order a screensaver for my mum on Amazon and know when it's going to be delivered, but yet I can't see where X is in our own internal supply chain? In other words, people's expectations are changing. We have a generation of people that are accustomed to transparency, visibility, and speed in the supply chain. And there's an expectation that that needs to move into the business-to-business internal supply chains. Then we've got relentless innovation. The innovation in things like drones, the innovation in things like AWS itself, they're all fairly obvious innovations. But more often than not, the things that we're talking about are small. You may even go unnoticed by some. So let me go ahead and call one out to you. If you look at our buy box, if you go and buy an inflatable kayak, the very first thing we're going to offer you is 2 paddles to go with it because you don't want to be stuck up the creek without your paddles. And it's because we recognize that the customer didn't want an inflatable kayak. The customer wanted to spend time on the river with their family enjoying the kayak. So therefore, by making those simple adjustments, we're able to offer products that are going to help that experience occur. And if you take the same piece within within your own industry, then imagine what it would be like for a maintenance engineer who's received an engine into the assembly bay. The engineer doesn't want spare parts. The engineer wants that engine functioning. So if we are required to provide, more often than not, 3 or 4 other widgets with a particular piece that's going to be serviced, then let's make that offer up front to the engineer so that we're not then wasting time later by having to continuously reorder. Imagine the same scenario on a remote oil rig or a remote site, being able to provide all the parts that are likely to be required to carry out the action that you need, rather than simply having to continuously reorder. So these are the sorts of innovations where we're using the buy box that I just described from Amazon, and we're taking that innovation to customers and we're helping them do similar things. Then, of course, we like to think of ourselves as Earth's most customer-centric organization, but I'll let you be the judge of that. When we get a bit deeper into the Amazon supply chain, the first thing that we recognize is that there are more than 50 different systems and tools that are orchestrating our inbound operation. Now, these tools are doing everything from monitoring vendor movement towards us. Bear in mind, please, that circa 60% of all volume moved across Amazon doesn't belong to Amazon, but belongs to vendors. So we got the volume coming inbound streams. Then, of course, what we also have is we've got tools that are monitoring truck fill rates. We've got tools that are optimizing capacity in the fulfillment centers, labor planning, all the rest of it for volume coming towards us. But why? Because we're trying to answer this one question. And we're trying to answer it constantly in the sense that we're challenging ourselves. If you knew for sure something was about to happen, what would you do differently? And of course, at any time, if the answer is nothing, then it's okay. You don't need the data. You're not going to take any action anyway. But if the answer is something, then the visibility is worthwhile. Hence the number of systems that Amazon has monitoring the whole inbound operational flow, because we recognize that with that information, we are able to do something differently. If we know what volume's coming towards us, we can choose which fulfillment center to send it to. If we know the capacity of the fulfillment centers, we can optimize that network placement logic. And if we know the current labor position or capacity position in a particular fulfillment center, then again, we can make other decisions as to where we move volume. But whenever people start the conversations around supply chain, you hear frequently this notion, it's John, my problem is I can't see end to end. And it's a fascinating piece that often is surfaced. But more often than not, it's not that you can't see end to end. I mean, imagine, you know where you're procuring parts from, you know who your middle mile movement is, you know who your global mover is, you know who your transportation manager is, there's lots and lots of knowns out there. The quantity that you've ordered, the likely demand set, lots and lots of knowns. The problem more often than not, it's not that you can't see end to end, is that you're not able to bring the data together in order to do something with it. So for us, we look at it in this way. There is an explosion of data available to you. We can do vessel arrival times to give you an indication of when your volume is likely to be landed. You can do port congestion data. You could be looking at vendor stock holdings. You could have IoT devices on your trucks. I mean, loads and loads and loads of different sources of data. Then there's also an explosion of people who are persona who are interested in your data. Could be business analysts, finance people, could be external, could be other vendors, could be OEMs, doesn't matter. Loads and loads of persona that are interested in your data. But not only that, there are more and more people that now want to make decisions based on the data. And of course, when we want to make decisions based on the data, it very quickly becomes not good enough to have a reasonable idea. And we need to know for sure. In other words, we need data that is in near or actual real time. So we look at it in 3 distinct ways. We look at planning, and we're interested in everything from extraction to consumption. So we're worried about labor in the right place at the right time, the spot logistics. We're worried about whether we've got the right capacity and so forth. Then we also consider collaboration. It's great that you've got a plan, but how are you going to execute? And collaboration is not just about dealing with external organizations, but also dealing with your own internal teams. And it's making sure that what we're not doing to collaborate is making telephone calls, sending WhatsApp messages, or sending CSV files through the system. How can we get to the stage where people have got the data they need in order to make the decisions that they need to make in order to help the value chain move on? Then there's execution. What would you do if you knew the truck was going to be late? If you knew the ship was going to be delayed? If you knew the port was congested? And if the answer is something, like I mentioned previously, then we're drawing insights. And if we're drawing insights across this, then we can take action. And we want all of these three things to be in harmony. So if there is an execution issue that results in a change in the plan and we need to collaborate differently, we want all three to work in unison. So when you look at Amazon.com, more than 300 little microservices, these are little widgets of IT capability, immediately spin up. And one of the things that people love about it is this notion of that sort of cognitive procurement. So let me go back. You can see that we have a nice picture of some coffee that someone may choose to buy. Well, behind the scenes of that, people are wanting that same experience within their supply chains. You know, how am I going to go and autonomously procure items, or how am I going to get that Amazon-esque experience into my operations so that my service engineers or my customers are able to have a similar buying experience from Amazon? And we bring that Amazon-esque experience through the cognitive procurement engine. And it's where what we're doing is we're helping change product information to knowledge, a basic example. And in that way, what we're trying to do is to help the customer to make better and more informed decisions. And when you look at these microservices that we were talking about in Amazon just a moment ago, and I was telling you about the number that spin up, one of them of particular interest is the Fulfil the Promise engine. And the Fulfil the Promise engine is taking into account everything inside that large rectangle. It's evaluating which vendor volume is moving towards us. It's identifying the cost of production in any given fulfillment center. It's looking at the time this truck needs to leave a fulfillment center in order to get into the sortation and delivery stations. And then, of course, moving it to the customer. And long gone are the days where Amazon simply delivered a product to someone's house. We're now delivering to lockers. We're delivering pallet loads of volume into other people's warehouses for their own internal operations. We're even delivering to the trunks of people's cars. So let's take that a bit deeper. This is a snapshot of the Amazon laydown in Europe. Overlay on top of this, please, Royal Mail, Deutsche Post, FedEx, DHL, and all the rest of it. And we have a simple question to answer. A customer in France has ordered a particular product. From which fulfillment center shall we send it, and using which delivery means to get it to the customer? And we need to rinse and repeat that a lot. In Q4 2019, in Europe alone, we delivered 2.2 billion packages to our customers. So this is the Fulfil the Promise engine in action. So the customers in France, the green fulfillment centers are technically feasible and meet promise, and the blue fulfillment centers are technically feasible but don't meet promise. Based on a number of criteria that we have, as you can see here, unit shipping price and so forth, the system is going to make an evaluation as to which fulfillment center to send it from. Now, of course, I'm showing you fulfillment centers. These could be suppliers moving towards an OEM. These could be different countries with different volume that you're bringing together, different parts, critical parts, doesn't matter. Same principles. It's all about identifying where all the sources are, what the current criteria are that you have, and then bringing it together. And in this way, we can do clever things. We can do adjustments for risk. So for instance, are we procuring parts from all of them from the same supplier, from the same region? What happens if there's a geopolitical risk and suddenly we can't do that anymore? So it's about understanding how we're going to move the various components together in an autonomous way. So as you probably gather, we're quite data-driven in Amazon. And any data-driven business is going to have customer experience driving demand, which gives you data that enables you to create new services and products. And as long as you've got your people, your process, your data technology, sustainability, and security at the very heart of what you do, you've got a solid business model. But one of the things that I'm most interested in are operational efficiencies. And I'm particularly interested in operational efficiencies if there's a low cost to experiment to get at them. So think about in your own context. What would it mean if we were able to, reduce your overtime bill by 1% across your entire value chain? Or increase your fixed asset utilization by 1%, decrease cost of goods sold by 1%. These are reasonable numbers. When we're dealing with medium-sized CPGs, A day of inventory holding, for example, could be anywhere between sort of 30 and $70 million per day of inventory holding. So if I'm able to create a little experiment that it results in an operational efficiency over my inventory holding, or an efficiency in my labor planning, or an efficiency in the cost I'm paying for goods, or the fixed asset utilization of my warehousing, or the cost of the goods that I'm selling, and so forth. If I'm able to do that, then actually I can achieve some reasonably good returns for very low cost. So the way that we go down doing this data-driven approach is that, first of all, it doesn't matter which systems you're using in terms of your ERP. It doesn't matter which vendors or systems they're using, and so forth. One of the things that most IT companies are going to say to you is that the way to solve this is build a data lake, because that fixes everything. And it's an interesting starting point because, first of all, you can't swim in a data lake, and secondly, it solves nothing on its own. So really, whilst you do need to surface the data, you should only be surfacing the data if you've got a good business question. So if you've got a good business question and you've got data available, and most importantly, you're answering the business question based on the data that you've been given, then you're in a virtuous circle. And if you're in that virtuous circle, data-driven decision making, then you can use AI and ML to help with your decision support. And if you're using AI ML to help with your decision making, then it's a smaller step to move towards predictive and prescriptive guidance. And it's another step to get automation. So here's Amazon again. The Amazon ERP system, some cool little services from AWS, inevitable data lake, and some people running the supply chain. In Europe, we have more than 100,000 supply routes open. The thickness of the lines indicate the volume being moved, the arrows the direction of travel. I'll draw your attention to Rome, Milan, Vienna supply route. During the pandemic, the Italian government closed the border and our system self-healed. Now, of course, you would have been really impressed by that only for a few moments ago, whenever I told you that effectively all that's happened is that RE4 is no longer available, so we've gone to LEAL 1. Because the system is continuously running simulations, and once one option is no longer available, it's switched. Now, the significance of that isn't that we've been able to have this autonomous activity. The significance is that the persona who are running the supply chain, they can now focus on harder problems. Do I have any volume about to be landed in Italy? Are any other countries going to suddenly do the same thing? What did the French government mean by essential goods only? Is this about to occur in the US? These are things that are much more important for our senior leaders in supply chain to be focused on. And one of the things that matters as well is that when the disruption finished, the supply chain didn't suddenly go back to the way that it used to be, because it's an intelligence-driven supply chain. So actually, we ended up with a very different network. But you got to start somewhere. And it's not fair to characterize as if Bill Gates, as if whenever we were building out Amazon in the garage, that suddenly we had this fully autonomous, all singing, all dancing supply chain. We did not. So how do we go about doing it? Well, the first thing that we do is that we identify those use cases, those things, those 1% improvements, those operational efficiencies, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. We identify those. The very next thing that we're going to do is build the system that we need to address that point. Then we're going to ingest only the data that we need to answer the question that we have. Rinse and repeat. In that way, what we're doing is we're continuously adding capability to the supply chain platform so that you're able to answer these big business questions that you've got. What Amazon doesn't advocate is the building out of some monolithic thing that proclaims to solve all the problems of the world in your supply chain, which is actually quite clunky in some areas and very good in others. Let's go build what you need to solve the problems that you have and add capability over time. Remember, if we were able to remove one day of inventory holding across your entire value chain, or we were able to improve your on time and full, what difference would that make to you? So if it's significant, then building the platform that answers those questions is going to help to drive real operational benefits. And here's an example of that. So you probably thought to yourselves, like, there's a British guy and he hasn't talked about the weather yet. It's okay, I brought a slide. So whenever we look at the weather, it's very easy to say, hey guys, look, it's raining in the UK. Well, of course it is. But it's also raining in Madrid and Barcelona. And that's interesting, but so what? Well, if I told you that we had a fulfillment center in Madrid and a fulfillment center in Barcelona, then you can understand why I'm drawing your attention to it. If I then told you that our data scientists had calculated the route between Madrid and Barcelona, that then allocated the weather impact to that route, and that then applied a speed penalty to a 40-foot vehicle driving between those two locations, that's really interesting. But what's the answer? Well, the answer is 12. It's going to take 12 additional hours to drive between those two locations. Now that's good, but if I was in a traditional business, I might have to pull out CSV files and find everybody impacted by that change in weather so that I can actually introduce a delay. But we were able to add that 12 hours onto a ship method. And because we know that the 12 hours is accurate more often than not, we do so autonomously, which means that we update across the entire value chain the impact of the weather in Madrid to Barcelona, or indeed anywhere else in the world. So the point is, if you want to be able to create this sort of notion of data-driven automation, it starts with understanding the challenge that you have. It then results in getting the data that you need to make the decision, making the decisions, and then automating the decisions so that you're able to get this notion of either predictive and prescriptive guidance or full automation in your supply chain. So I hope that in this conversation, we started with the notion of end-to-end visibility being the thing that people want to achieve in their supply chains. And I hope I've challenged that by saying, well, actually, look, guys, unless you're going to surface the data and do something with it, there's no point. And if you're going to surface the data and do something with it, then why wouldn't you want predictive analytics and prescriptive guidance? And if you're going to have those two things, then you might as well have automation. But the thing that is ultimately true is that no one knows your business better than you. So what we need to do is partner with people so that you're able to get more actionable insights over time so that you're able to make these business efficiencies that we talked about. We see significant change in the near term in how supply chain leaders of the future will be thinking and will be acting. And one of the things that we call out is that we believe that supply chain leaders are going to need to be able to focus on strategy. They're going to need to be able to focus on cross-functional, cross-teamwork, so the sales, the ops, and so forth. We're going to have to work with finance. We're going to have to work with manufacturing teams. We're going to have to help build the collaborative space so that we're all able to work across the whole of the value chain. So those are fairly significant changes that can occur more easily if we can get to the stage of having predictive prescriptive guidance and automation within our thinking. But some final thoughts. If we're going to innovate, we are going to fail. If we're experimenting in this space, the outcome is unknown because it's a genuine experiment, which means that we might fail. Also, if we're going to innovate, it's quite likely that we're going to try something, you're going to try something that others around you are not going to understand. You're going to be misunderstood. But also with that misunderstanding is that as senior leaders, there is the willingness to not understand necessarily in great detail what it is that our subordinates are trying to do and trying to encourage them to innovate. That in itself can be a challenge, especially if they keep failing. So how do you dust people off and help them innovate? And you can't just bolt innovation on. It's got to be something that we do across the entire organization. Or to put it differently, more often than not, what we need to do is get out of the way of people who are trying to innovate. How can we bring this low cost of experimentation down to the shop floor and help at the very lowest levels people find those 1% one day improvements in the operations so that we are able to help drive business success? So I hope what I've covered today has been of interest to you all, and do please feel to reach out if there's anything else that I can do to help you all. Thank you.